I want to turn now to looking at Nipissing Serenity Hospice as a case study and looking in more detail at its founding, its mission statement, how it's run, and its trajectory into the future. And I think it's an excellent example because it's very much coming out of its community and reflecting its community. And as we've discussed throughout the course, that's what a successful hospice has to do to have sustainability. And some of you may have been there and some of you may know where it is. It's on John Street in downtown North Bay, and it's quite ingenious the way it's situated because it's on a residential street, but it abuts onto Laurier Woods, which is a large conservation area. So it's like it's in a conservation area, but it's off of a main street. And so it was created like this on purpose. And so I'll be talking about more about that when I talk about the architecture. So I will be attaching the website, a link to the website, and so you can go through it on your own to see some of the pictures. And it is interesting to look at the website, which is a lot more sophisticated than it was in the beginning. It's really been built out, and so we can see that the hospice right off the bat is offering a number of services. So for instance, currently they're offering a death cafe, so we can see or sponsoring one, and so we can see that this is being given by a death doula. So the ways in which hospice is acting as a kind of a node within this larger movement of working against death denial that we've been talking about throughout this course. And so having an institution like this, you have spaces that you can sponsor these talks in these beautiful rooms, and so that's an ongoing service that they're also providing. So when we look at what they say about themselves, so it says, located in North Bay, Ontario, Nipissing Serenity Hospice provides quality, compassionate, and holistic end-of-life palliative care to residents of Nipissing and East Parry Sound districts. And so it goes on to say it's bilingual. And so this idea of holistic care is being put right front stage. And it says the mission is to provide the highest quality, person-centered, residential hospice palliative care. Our specialized interdisciplinary team, with the support of volunteers, attends to the physical, psychosocial, spiritual, and practical needs of individuals and provides ongoing support for their loved ones. So there you have it in a nutshell, and this is, of course, completely recognizable to what Dame Cicely Saunders was doing, and definitely I know that the founders of the hospice were very aware of her work and knew of her and were modeling on her, there's no doubt. They also, I believe Mathilde and Vivian both knew or know Balfour Mount personally or have met him, or they certainly know a lot about him. So they're very hooked into the larger movement. And so it goes on to say the core values are compassion. We recognize that suffering and loss are important elements of end-of-life experience and commit to demonstrating empathy, openness, and non-judgment in the provision of care. And so linking back to the mission statement, the idea of the importance of the spiritual, of the psychosocial, and of also accommodating families and working with families. So certainly over the years, it's a small hospice, and you have to allocate money, and that's challenging, but certainly I know it was the goal to provide bereavement services through the hospice. We also hear, along with compassion, comfort. We recognize that each end-of-life journey is unique, and we commit to offering the highest quality hospice palliative care that addresses the specific physical, psychological, social, spiritual, and practical issues. So that idea of being about the patient and that being at the very center, and we know already from this course that has been kind of a radical reconfiguring of healthcare in Canada. So dignity, we recognize the value of each individual and commit to support his or her self-image, self-identity, and right to privacy. And so this is certainly a really important discussion that assisted dying uses all the time, is the idea of dignity. So it's important to note this is, of course, a central issue when we're looking at hospice and palliative care, and the idea that there's no one-size-fits-all practice that it has to reflect what the person and their family is wanting. Inclusion, we recognize and commit to honor the values, customs, traditions, cultural, religious, and spiritual beliefs and practices, as well as the life experiences, hopes, and dreams of residents, families, and communities. So good to see that's because we've talked about this, how the spiritual part can get shunted aside sometimes, and this is in their mission statement. So the idea that, and it's not just religion, it's culture. And so I know that one of the first things that was put in place was ventilation systems that allowed for smudging within the hospice for Indigenous practices. And so very much recognizing where they're situated and that there's a large Indigenous community in the North Bay and the North Bay area. And so having that also be central, that these customs, and obviously North Bay is multicultural just like the rest of Canada, and so recognizing that this has to be taken into consideration in developing a plan of care. This is an image of Nipissing Serenity Hospice as it was being constructed. I'll be showing some images of it now towards the end, but this is during construction. And so the timeline is long, as I mentioned in the earlier lecture, that it took approximately 15 years to go from vision to reality. And so you can see this is taking an incredible amount of endurance and commitment on the part of the people involved. According to the website, it was a small group that brought, the community was brought together to build a hospice by a small group of people. And so they begin their timeline in 2006 with Mathilde Bazanet, and it states she embarks on the mission of getting a residential hospice built for the Nipissing and East Parry Sound region. Her brother Lucien passed in a hospice in Chambly. She was amazed and deeply grateful for the high-quality palliative care that he received and the support offered from his family. So, like many, they had a personal experience with hospice that changed their view of it and kind of led them to become involved. And so she begins organizing other people that are interested in bringing this into reality. And so in 2011, the group gets a FedNor grant for a feasibility study. So this is just to look at the what's available, because you have to have a big enough population base to support it financially, and that there's, to show that there's a need for it. The government is certainly not going to get on board if you can't do that. So they get money to just run a feasibility study, and this confirmed that community support would be available to raise funds to build and sustain a 10-bed bilingual hospice residence. So it's small in my experience. Most hospices are, the largest that I come across is 25 beds. There's probably larger, but they tend to be small. So the North Bay one, obviously North Bay is a sort of small, medium-sized city, so a 10-bed hospice. And in the same year, 2011, the inaugural board of directors received confirmation of the incorporation of the hospital as a charitable not-for-profit corporation. So that, of course, is vital in fundraising. You have to show that it's an official charity so people can get receipts. Then in 2012, the fundraising begins, and that's been absolutely ongoing, and I'll be talking about that on a separate slide. And so we start to see a variety of people getting involved from within the community. So for instance, a fundraiser by Jim Marmino at the Davidi Club. So there's certainly what has been a large uptake within the Italian Canadian community, which is very large in North Bay. And so they've been involved in a lot of the fundraising and volunteer work at the hospice. There are a variety of concerts that were organized also for fundraising. And in 2016, we see the first annual Hike for Hospice, and I am going to be talking about that separately. And so we start to see these fundraising efforts really gaining momentum. And it states that as of 2016, the long, arduous search for a peaceful, centrally located park-like property is finally successful. And so I did mention this at the very beginning, that I think it's very reflective of its location, that they wanted it to be in nature. And this is different than St. Christopher's Hospice, which is in a suburban setting. It's on bus routes, etc. That in the case of Nipissing Serenity Hospice, it's in Northern Ontario. And for those of us who know the area, it's one of the most beautiful places on earth, in my opinion. And so why not take advantage of that? And if people are coming from the area, that's what they're accustomed to. So they're going to feel more at home in an environment that's based within a natural setting where they're looking out onto nature. So that was clearly very important from the very beginning. And so in 2016, they made an agreement with the city of North Bay, and Dr. Claire Bourgault was presented $1 to Mayor Al MacDonald for the purchase of 2.4 acres of property just above Chippewa Creek and adjacent to Laurier Woods. So basically, the city gave the property to the board of the hospice. And so we see again the vital importance of the political side of it and the buy-in. And so the mayor being completely on side, and we're going to see a variety of politicians were instrumental in moving this forward, and they knew Mathilde and the board personally from the community. And so these community ties are extremely important. We saw that with Dame Cicely Saunders. Even her family ties were very important to the success of getting it up and running. And so if you've been to the hospice, you know it's located right on the Chippewa Creek, and so it's a very beautiful setting in the woods. And so it's again, as we talked about, this low-slung kind of building all on one level. And so it goes on to say they then hired the architect, Laroque Elder Architects, and so that is a local firm based in North Bay. So again, the architect understands the region that they're in and was clearly building it with that in mind. It's a modernist building, but nonetheless, it's built. So for instance, I was looking at the website of the architect, and they are, one of their commitments is to environmental building, and so environmental sustainability. So that they also, if you look at what they've worked on before, it's a lot of religious buildings or educational facilities and Indigenous buildings. So clearly they have a social mandate that they're operating with. And so, so you can see that they chose the architect very carefully to reflect their own values. And that to me shows in the structure itself. And we'll be looking at that in a few more slides. So they hire the architect, and of course that's a very important step. And then the fundraising is ongoing. So in the fall of 2017, MPP John Fraser, Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Health, announces the hospice will receive a capital grant of $1.2 million. So this is a watershed moment where the provincial government is coming on board and giving a significant amount of money. So and it's from the Ministry of Health. So we're starting to see, as I've talked about before, that at this point by 2017, the provincial government of Ontario is recognizing, the aging population and so on, and so they're recognizing the importance of hospices being built throughout Ontario. And so in winter spring of 2018, they hire a construction company with an estimated building cost of $7.4 million. And we're told that the same year the Hike for Hospice earns $80,000, so a large amount of money. So the financing of hospice is very challenging. It has improved with the Compassionate Care Act that I talked about earlier, but nonetheless, hospices are constantly in a state of fundraising. And so in 2018, there was a sod turning, which is always a huge moment where people have that sense that this is actually coming to fruition, that this is actually going to happen. It's not just an idea on paper anymore. And so there's typically, if you look on the website, a picture of them with their hard hats on and their shovels in the ground. And so there was a sod turning ceremony that featured MPP Vic Fideli, who is the local MP and at the time was also the Minister of Finance. So clearly very tight connections with people in high places, and announced that the capital funding from the Ministry of Health and Long-Term Care would be increased to $2 million. And it was also announced that the project would receive a capital grant of $1.5 million from the Northern Ontario Heritage Fund. So we're starting to see very large amounts of money, which is indicates that there's a lot of faith in the project on the part of the government. So these things have to come together. There's no guarantee they're going to come together, but clearly I think it's important to note, as Mathilde was saying in the earlier slide, that with Sudbury having a hospice, I think is definitely, North Bay is always kind of in a weird rivalry dialogue with Sudbury, so that they were successful in getting theirs up and running, I think was very, very important. And so we see they also hire an executive director, and so I'll be looking at him separately in a little bit. And then in 2019, the finishing touches in the interior were worked on, and various key players are hired. And I find it very telling that when you look at the team, the kitchen coordinator is on there, and I've made my feelings known about the bad food in most institutions in Canada, and this was another such attention to detail. And so wanting to hire a chef, somebody who could create good tasting, nutritious food, and also be culturally sensitive and make, I know that the chef has made like the favorite food of the person. So that it's not this kind of bureaucratic type of, even in the food service, it's very personalized. So in 2020, the care team began to work towards opening the facility, and as many of us know, or all of us know, this was also when the pandemic hit. And so I know this was an extremely challenging environment to try to open a hospice in, but they did it, and they were able to open the hospice in 2020. I think this photograph says it all. Look at the joy on everybody's faces and the very evident relief. And there's Mathilde at the center doing the ribbon cutting. And she's surrounded by, on her right is the mayor at the time, Al MacDonald. On her left is the MPP Vic Fideli, who was Minister of Finance at the time. And on the further left is Anthony Rota, who anyone in North Bay will know. He's the sitting MP, and he was the Speaker of the House in Ottawa. So very influential people. And the Master of Ceremonies was a Senator, Lucie Moncion. And then to the right is Vivian Papes. And so she took over as chair of the board from Mathilde. And I have mentioned I think she's currently Dean at Canadore, and she's president of the Canadian Association for Palliative Care. So very heavy hitters here at the opening, people extremely committed to the hospice and deeply entrenched in their own communities. And so I think that we can see that these are our vital aspects of a successful development of a hospice in any community. And it speaks to the ties that were binding amongst, I know they all knew each other. It's a very small town, so she would have known all of them personally. And so that becomes a very important part of having the goodwill and the money and the support that comes once it's opened. And so there was a controversy, I think I may have mentioned it earlier, with it played out in the local paper, The Nugget, and that's how it came to my attention. I was sort of following it, but it came to my attention that the hospice was opening and that something was going on through the paper and through Dr. Strigley in my department. So some people had written into the paper and had objected to the fact that the hospice wasn't going to offer maid services. And so this caused a flurry of controversy right on top of the opening, along with the pandemic. So I know that Dr. Strigley immediately became involved because she's very involved in death positive movement, death cafes, and with the Palliative Care Network in North Bay. And she wrote into the paper, and I wrote into the paper. And it really spoke to the fact that despite as we know, it's becoming more known, but most people don't understand what hospice and palliative care are. And in my experience, that's the majority of people still. It's improving, but in my experience, when I talk about it to people, the vast majority of people vaguely have heard of it. They don't really know what it is. And so when somebody starts spreading disinformation, it can be very influential. And so part of what had to happen is making it very clear that hospice palliative care is a completely different philosophy to assisted dying. And that did eventually become clear. It took a little while, but once that was made clear, I think people understood. And it's also important to note that at the time when Dame Cicely Saunders was developing hospice and palliative care, there was a whole movement at that time for what was then called euthanasia. And she was very aware of it, and she talked about it throughout her career. And so this movement was one of the reasons that hospice and palliative care was developed, to give people an alternative to that. And so that had to be made very, very clear to the community. And I think in the end, what really made the biggest difference was once the hospice was open, people were having experiences of it with their families, and so and giving testimonials. And so when I was on the board, we used to receive these all the time, where families would be writing in, and so we would get to hear what they were saying. And as this word spread throughout the community, and the community was moving in to support the hospice, that was a very dicey moment, because if the community didn't come in to support it, you're going to be in trouble. And they did. And I would say that is largely because they saw and experienced the difference it makes to have a hospice and to have that kind of care. I want to spend a little bit of time talking about governance of hospice, and it really reflects how it functions and the way it's a democratic, community-based institution, very unlike a business board of governors. And I did serve on the board, so I have some inside kind of knowledge of this. And I have to say, I've served on, not a lot, but some boards before, but this was very different. And part of it, without a doubt, is because of the nature of what that it's a hospice. And so I really noticed that people pulled together. Boards can be very, there can be a lot of conflict in different kinds of boards. People have different opinions and so on. Obviously, it's democratic, but I saw very little of that on this board because this isn't a profit-making business. It's a charitable business, a charitable organization, and so I really noticed that people were very cooperative, very committed to the mission of the hospice. Now, part of that is because those people were handpicked, again, in the beginning by Mathilde and then Vivian. Vivian is another person, Vivian Papes. If you go out for coffee with Vivian, you're probably going to end up involved. And so, because you feel their commitment, and it's kind of contagious. And so just looking over the current board, you can see they also were very careful about picking people with different skill sets. And so you'll be unsurprised, a lot of nurses. One of the current directors is the director of long-term care, long-term care facility, but also people from the banking sector in town, because you need that financial knowledge. And there's also an Indigenous advisor is a director, and that's a standing position of having an Indigenous advisor, and that was part of how the board was set up at the very beginning. So you can see they've been very careful about representing the community overall. And just to give you some idea, one of the current directors is Andrea McClellan, who was on the board when I joined and then had to leave because she was heading up the vaccination drive. She had come out of retirement to head up the vaccination drive in the area for COVID. So, and now she's back on the board. So that's you can see it's also the kind of people that they're able to attract. So the board is representing all of these different kind of aspects of the community. So I just want to look at, this is a picture of Gil Ferrand, who's the executive director currently and was the founding executive director. And I also interviewed him, and I interviewed Vivian, so I'm just going to be drawing from that a little bit to get at kind of their personal motivations. So he told me that he began his career working in the nonprofit sector out of a desire to give back to community and to do some good in the world. So we see that hospices, like many charitable organizations, attract a different kind of person, or they attract a particular type of person. So Gil wasn't coming out of hospice and palliative care, but he was coming out of the nonprofit sector. And so he said that after the death of his mother from cancer, he was determined to work in the area of cancer research and end of life. So again, a personal experience that leads him into working in hospice and palliative care. And he told me that that if he'd known about hospice, he would have made sure that his mother actually benefited from it, although she wasn't able to do that. So he told me that he's determined that all in his community have access to hospice care. And so, as with Mathilde, there's this drive to make this available for anybody that wants it. And he notes that the Nipissing Serenity Hospice is committed to supporting the cultural and spiritual needs of residents. So I asked him specifically about that. And I used to do that when I was on the board. And so I'm not sure with the Sacred Room. It was extremely empty when I was there. And to be fair, when you're opening a hospice, there's money to be allocated, and he's most worried about it being up and running and caring for its patients. And so I suspect that more has been done with that room now. So he said, we don't pretend to be experts on all traditions, but we work to ensure that we connect patients to those in the community who are. So some of the bigger hospices, I think, have chaplains on staff, but my understanding at Nipissing Serenity Hospice is that they call in clergy or spiritual experts or death doulas from the larger community, and then they serve in that way. They're not necessarily a standing part of the hospice. And then I also interviewed Vivian, and so she's the past board president, and so she began her career as an emergency room nurse, and then as a result of having children, she wanted something less demanding with shift work and so on, and so she shifted into community nursing. And she told me that she realized that she needed different skills when dealing, so she started having to nurse people at end of life, and she realized that was a whole different skill set. So she began to take courses in palliative care as a result of this experience in community nursing, and she learned how to work with the dying and their families. And so she told me, this is when I really understood what nursing is really about. So this was a profound experience for her of learning this type of nursing. And as a result, she went on to take up leadership roles in the community. And as I said, she served as chair of the Ontario Hospice and Palliative Care Ontario, and then now she's president of the Canadian Hospice and Palliative Care Association. So this became a kind of a larger vocation for her. So she told me, when working with people at end of life, we are often the closest to the people in their most vulnerable time. And so we had a discussion when I was interviewing her about curriculum changes and so on. And so she's dean at Canadore, and so we talked quite a bit about that and how we hope that curriculum can reflect these insights from palliative care. And this is something I'd be interested to hear how all of you feel about that. So we can see that governance in the palliative care hospice sector, it obviously reflects the larger pattern in Canadian society, but it's very specific also in the way it draws on healthcare people who work in healthcare. One of the other directors, I think he's vice president now, also worked in the funeral business. So it's people who are involved in end-of-life care in a variety of ways. As part of their connection with the larger hospice and palliative care movement, we can see at Nipissing Hospice that there's an interdisciplinary care team And so going just down the list, we can see there's a clinical care lead, volunteer and support coordinator, kitchen coordinator. So as I mentioned, that's considered a vital part of the team. That's not a kind of afterthought. Fund development coordinator, office coordinator, maintenance coordinator, and then physicians. So there are physicians attached to the hospice who come in regularly, and then nurse and personal support workers. So it's a very complex group of people in a very small institution, but serving a variety that sort of reflects that larger vision of the whole person. And I think it's interesting, the maintenance coordinator. So I'll be showing you some photos of how they've worked around also the exterior of the building to make it beautiful. And so it's definitely that idea of team, including the person at the reception, like all of it. And I've talked about that idea of a therapeutic environment, that's all important. How you feel when you walk in. Do you feel welcome? Does it feel like a welcoming environment? Now, there were real challenges. I'm not part of the board now, so I don't know the details, but certainly when I was there, because of COVID, with getting nursing staff in, and that was a province-wide issue. I don't know how it is now, but there was a shortage of nurses, and so that has been an ongoing challenge, I think, in all healthcare institutions in Ontario. And so we see that, as I said, that team. And so on the board you would get periodic reports from the on-call physician. And so I was able again to interview Dr. Inez Jinnah, who is a local family and palliative care physician that works in conjunction with Nipissing Serenity Hospice. And we've been talking about the subspecialties of palliative care in this course. And as I said before, when I've met palliative care, both doctors and nurses, they're a different breed. When I interviewed Dr. Jinnah, I could really see that. So I was asking her specifically about religion because I'm in religious studies and it's part of my research. So I asked her, how would you say Islam influences you in your work? And she replied, it infuses everything that I do. It comes through in how I speak with my patients and in my care for them. I was taught by my father, who was also a physician, that it is very important to treat people the way that you would want to be treated. And she recognized that this can get lost in our system, particularly because healthcare is under such stress right now. And again, it's a bit of a chicken and an egg situation where hospice and palliative care can take some of that pressure off if it can be developed fully. So I said, do you feel that the practice of medicine is a vocation, a calling? And she said, people go into medicine for a variety of reasons and all have to work very hard, but there's always the element of compassion. The Quran does teach that you should help whenever you can. The gifts given to you should be used to help others. I was provided the opportunity, the finances, and the time to fulfill this role, so I should use it for the good of my family, my community, and my society. Islam teaches us to spend of what we have, including money, time, knowledge, to benefit those around us. So again, this isn't obviously obvious to the naked eye. You just see a very committed physician, but I did want to get at her motivations. And so I asked her, how do you think religion can function best in a secular society? And she said, I don't see the dichotomy. In Canada, we have the privilege to practice our profession in a way that doesn't conflict with religion. I am legally obligated to provide my patients with all their available options. So I thought that was interesting and heartening that she's obviously already grappled with this and she doesn't see it as a problem. And I asked her if religious faith helped her to stay centered in challenging situation. She said, as a Muslim, I am comforted by knowing that God's will decides everything. Things happen and they happen for a reason. We are asked by God to always show mercy and to alleviate suffering wherever possible. Muslims believe in the afterlife and that this life is one part of a much longer story. It is my role to offer assistance and to help my patients navigate and to be a reliable source of assistance. So she went on to tell me that she always gives her phone number to her patients so they can call at any time, and that has never been abused. And she made a point of saying that she also knows she has patients that volunteer and that they're not religious, so that's not the only motivation for people moving into these lives of service. So I asked her how she became interested in palliative care, and she said that it had happened over 25 years ago and that she was trained by Dr. Brian Shaw. And she said, he taught me how to talk to patients, the right approach. And then I was asked to join a palliative care committee. In palliative care, I am privileged to be there for people at a very emotional time and to provide assistance. We provide excellent care within the hospital, and now we have a hospice. And so I did ask her about controversies about telling people about what stage of life they're at, and she said, and I thought this was very telling. She said, I find this very cultural. I had a case in the ICU where the daughter-in-law did not want me to tell the patient that they were dying. But things are changing, and we now have advanced directives to guide us. We have the Spikes protocol, which is a 6-step protocol for breaking bad news. So we can see curriculum and training of people in healthcare is changing and recognizing the need to approach end of life in a very specific way. But I do think that's a crucial point to say that just because we think we should tell people, cultures have different ways of approaching this. So I asked her if there was a Muslim idea of a good death, and she said, not specifically, because again, the time of death is part of the will of God. Islam teaches you should remember your death every day, not in a morbid way, but in a way to maintain a larger perspective. But there is a general idea that the person should be at peace with themselves, comfortable, and surrounded by family. But the central idea is that if you are at peace with life and what you have done, it doesn't really matter where you are. So again, seeing the way that religion can be a driver for somebody, and yet they're working within a secular healthcare setting. So we're going to do a little tour of the hospice now, and there is a short film that's part of the website, and you can also look at that. But I just wanted to talk about the idea of the environment and the architecture, because I think Nipissing Serenity Hospice is an excellent example. They did it with not a lot of funds, but they were able to create a very, it's a small building, but just kind of perfectly executed. And so when you walk in, it's very bright and airy, which is one of the larger principles we've seen in almost every hospice, certainly that I'm aware of anyway. And so again, you can see looking out onto nature, and all of the rooms are facing in that direction towards the creek, towards the forested area, so that the person is looking out onto nature. And this is the main kind of dining area, and we can see, it's still clearly a public space, but it's set up in a more home-like way. And to the left, you can't see it in the photograph, there aren't a lot of photographs of the hospice actually, and I think, as I've said earlier, they're much more concerned with doing the work than getting a lot of great photographs. As frustrating as it is for me, that's not their focus, obviously. But on the left is the kitchen area, and so it gets a lot of use. And so when they're fundraising, so they had a cookie campaign, and the volunteers will go in and work together in the kitchen. So this becomes a kind of a meeting place for volunteers and for families and for staff. That's right at the center of the hospice. And then straight ahead in the picture, you see that sliding door is the boardroom, and so that's where the board meets. So the board is also integrated right within the space. And then on the other side are the guests, what they call guest suites, which I think they've done that on purpose. They don't call them hospital rooms, they're guest suites, and they're clearly institutional. They don't look like a family bedroom, but that attempt to make them a much more a bright, airy, much more home-like environment. And and the reception room is right at the front, again, with lots of natural light coming in. So we can see that this was designed with a lot of flow. And so you can have, to the right of this image is an area where they often will have, if there's an event of some kind or a speaker comes in, that's in a little library. And so there's a variety of kind of small spaces that allow for the many different functions of the hospice. And so that need for flexible space within an institutional setting like this. Building on the larger philosophy behind the building, we can see again this room that's a kind of an indoor-outdoor space. Looks a bit like a really high-end cottage, so that would also appeal to a lot of people from this area. And that idea of creating comfort for people, we talked about the role of nature in terms of our sense of well-being. We now know that's a fact, that being in nature relaxes people. And so this space was very important, I know, in the building of the hospice, where the family and the patient could sit. They don't necessarily have to be completely outside, although they can also go out directly outside depending on the weather. And so again, facing onto that creek, and so creating that kind of serene environment. I mean, the name of the hospice indicates that's the goal. And I think that there was a real effort made to reflect this in the actual design of the building. So as I mentioned, fundraising was vital from the very beginning, and the fact that Mathilde Bazinet was such a phenomenal and is such a phenomenal fundraiser was key to its success. And the fact that she could rally the community the way that she was able to do. And so it's never given, but we can see that one of the major fundraisers that Nipissing Serenity Hospice does is the Hike for Hospice. Some of you may have participated in it, some of you may have given money. And so this has been an extremely successful fundraising effort annually. And you know, there are a lot of fundraisers out there, so you're always kind of competing against, you know, Run for the Cure and these Terry Fox and these, not that you're competing against them, but there are a lot of fundraisers out there that people are constantly being asked to give money to. So making something successful is always challenging. And as I said before, I do think it's made a little bit easier by the fact that many people are very sympathetic to this cause. And so, again, during COVID, they had to adjust it, and it was like you had to kind of go out on your own and do it rather than as a group. But again, partaking of that community aspect, going out as a group. And so on the website, it talks about the need for fundraising, and it states, although we receive generous financial support from the provincial government, it only funds around 60% of operational costs. So to survive and thrive, the hospice needs fundraising, and that's a lot of money. That's currently $800,000 annually to support programs and operate facilities. So so their aim is to raise $70,000 per month, and that's a lot of money. So they do have a fundraising person that spearheads this, and when I left, they were developing what were called, I think they were called ambassadors, and so getting key people in the community who have networks to also start fundraising. So there's a number, I've learned a lot. There's a number of different ways of getting this up and rolling and sustainable. And it says, donations allow the hospice to focus on providing the care to our loved ones through their last days and supporting the family members that surround them. And so there was also, I think it was for 3 years, there was the Smile Cookie campaign through Tim Hortons, and Tim Hortons will do that with charitable organizations that are considered to be very respected. And so the fact that they signed on when the hospice was so new was very telling. And so that raised a lot of money through that Smile Cookie campaign. And again, seeing the ways in which the community moved into to support that. So as time has gone on, this has become, I think, a little bit easier also because the families that have moved through the hospice often want to give money back because they're so appreciative of the experience, and so that gives a lot of momentum. And there've been, I think I mentioned the Stockfish family, there's been a number of different family foundations that have started to give large amounts of money to the hospice, and so that sets it up on a sustainable, that it's sustainable into the future. I'm going to end this lecture with an image from the outdoor space at Nipissing Serenity Hospice, and this took time to develop. I believe volunteers came in and planted some of the trees, and there's the gardeners, local gardeners that worked on putting in plants and flowers, and so that people can sit out. It's kind of a screened-in area, so there's some privacy also. I wanted to end by, so it's at the point now, it's been 4 years in operation, so there's been a lot of testimonials, and those are included on the website if you want to look at other ones. But I thought it was meaningful that today I received one in my mail that they sent, one of the testimonials. It's partly as part of their fundraising. So we can see that people who've experienced it are the greatest ambassadors for the hospice. And I would say that this is, I think all the people involved would say this, that the measure of your success is the experience of the people and their families. And so I wanted to finish by reading you this letter from somebody whose sister was in the hospice. So it says, I will never be able to fully express the immense gratitude I have for the staff and volunteers at Nipissing Serenity Hospice for the respect, care, and compassion shown to my sister Trish and our family. Trish was diagnosed with cancer around Thanksgiving in 2020. Her illness was under control for 3 years before it spread, and the prognosis was not great. Soon after that, her condition worsened, and it was time to bring her home to North Bay. I rushed down to Credit Valley Hospital in Mississauga to be with my sister. When I arrived, I was told that the palliative ward was in the basement. I was shocked and disheartened that a hospital would put end-of-life patients in an area with no windows, constant noise, and a considerable distance from the main entrance, making it difficult for anyone to visit. Trish was transferred to Nipissing Serenity Hospice on December 2nd and was greeted by the incredible staff. No basement, no darkness, just a beautiful suite with large windows and a peaceful atmosphere. For the next 8 days, my sister was treated like she was the most important person in the building. The staff got to know Trish and developed a relationship with her. The biggest difference to me was that they were not waiting for her to die. They were helping her to enjoy her life in the final days. This is what sets hospice apart. Although difficult, it was such a beautiful experience. It was so calm, so peaceful, so serene. Trish passed peacefully on December 10th, 2023, surrounded by family. While I was aware of Nipissing Serenity Hospice, it wasn't until I experienced the care as a family member that I truly understood how lucky we were to have this hospice in our community. Sincerely, Barb Spencer. So I'm going to end with that, and I think that really says it all in terms of the difference that a hospice can make within a community.